Hello and welcome back to the Coffee Chat series. The series is all about creating a space for people to share their professional and academic experiences. I think it's really important to hear from other people because everybody goes through different walks of life, and so they're going to encounter different things. By opening up a dialogue, we can then see into other people's perspectives and gain a better understanding of why people think or do certain things. And so that forms the basis of the Coffee Chat series. In today's episode, we'll be continuing our conversation talking about overcoming imposter syndrome in the business environment. Anyways, we hope you enjoy this episode. Let's hop right in.
This is Kat. And is this Kat?
This is Kat.
And this is episode 2. Imposter syndrome is an internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you.
Imposter syndrome. I think more people than not experience imposter syndrome. In fact, I didn't even know what this term meant until this past year when people are being more open about their mental health struggles. And I think during the pandemic, people have become more transparent about it because, we're always at home and it's really hard for other people to see how we're feeling. So you have to learn to articulate yourself. And I think that is when we're starting to hear the term imposter syndrome more. But even without knowing the term, did you ever feel it going through high school or going through university, Kat?
Yeah, I think with imposter syndrome, it's always been a struggle I've had. I told my last marketing group this, that every time I see others and see their achievements, I feel as if I need to take a step back. I'm not as confident as I am. Because I don't have the achievements other people have, I perceive myself to not be successful. And every day it's always kind of that challenge of, okay, I believe in myself, I'm confident in myself. And within business, there's a huge overlap where it's okay, mental health, and then it's okay, cover it up with the external rewards that you've been given, whether it's a title, whether it's a role. And I thought that okay, if I have a role, I have everything, here's kind of my mental health, it's covering it. But then for me, it's I realized the mental health needs to go over everything. That's such a high level. And I had so many days, especially during the pandemic, where I was okay, I don't feel like I can do a task, or I don't feel like I can apply to this role because Sally, random name, Sally has a role I wanted, and seems like she has more credentials than I do. I don't want to do it, and kind of that step back. But I think for me, the most important part is saying yo, I am myself. I am one person. I cannot put my mind into another person. And I have to be happy that, and be just that, those small feelings of gratitude where we're in business school or we're in university, we're able to learn, we're able to even apply in general, have a laptop in front of us or have a phone, and then going with those feeling of gratitude and taking on those next steps is something that kind of pushes me outside of my imposter syndrome. How about you? Or have you ever had those feelings or doubts?
For sure. And I think I came to realize that imposter syndrome does not only affect you for the big things in life. It can be super and subtle in our daily lives. And I definitely let that overtake me many times growing up, even in high school. I was playing competitive sports and I was constantly comparing myself and thinking that I was not good enough and I couldn't make this team, and I would just rather quit than to face rejection. But I was fortunate enough that throughout high school, I had a really good support system to continually encourage me and to kind of make me realize that I had potential and I was decent at what I love to do. And this helped translate into school and university, but still as I go into my career, I also face this imposter syndrome where I'm okay, I really want to get this role, but I don't know enough. I probably shouldn't apply. And I am the reason that I'm holding myself back. It's not even like the people that say no for this job. It's like myself, because I don't take that initial step to apply. But with all that negativity and all that stuff, like, I think there is an opportunity from this. Like, whenever you do feel like you're not good enough, you can kind of, it takes time, but like, you can try and use that as a motivator to work on your weaknesses. Because the only reason why we feel we have imposter syndrome is because we're comparing ourselves to someone that's better than us. And, you know, in life, there's always going to be people better than us. So we have to learn to accept that and accept ourselves and acknowledge our weaknesses. And by saying it and naming it, we can then move forward and like strengthen it and turn it into something better. I do have an example of that. So I actually absolutely hated public speaking back in high school because I froze in a really big presentation, and it was so embarrassing. Like, I'm turning red just thinking about it. So going into solder, we had Com 101 where you have to press a button and then the camera zoom in on your face and then you're speaking into a microphone. I had so much anxiety from that class, and like every time I walked in, my heart was pounding because I wanted the participation marks, but I was so afraid. And that was like my imposter syndrome kind of like hitting me and telling me like, oh, you're no match against these students that are so confident and not afraid to speak their minds. But as I talked to more people, I realized they also felt nervous, you know, speaking in front of large groups, and it's totally normal. And from there, I pivoted and tried to work on that weakness. So I did some case competitions, and it made me super scared. But by practicing and putting myself in those more uncomfortable situations, I was able to normalize it and then eventually like overcome it. So there is an opportunity to overcome your fears, your weaknesses.
Now you're a public speaking TA. And if you don't want to, whoever's watching doesn't know TA, she's a teacher. She's a teaching assistant. She teaches people how to speak publicly. What the? She went from 0 to 100, like, oh.
I still have doubts too, like even though, like you said, like I do TA, but still like I still have doubts. So imposter syndrome never like fully leaves, but I think through experiences you learn to cope with it, and then you learn to push through, and I think that's so important.
Yeah. So many good points, Kat. I think the biggest part is just knowing yourself and knowing that when you compare other people, like you said, like in high school, in university, there's going to be that endless thought that like the next best person in our heads is better than who we are. But like everyone has told me in elementary school, high school, university, the only person you need to compete with is yourself in terms of the challenges that you make, in terms of the goals that you set. Sometimes I'm like, I want to run like Usain Bolt, like I'm going to go 100 meters in like 5 seconds. But in the end, it's like, you can't, there's no average person, you know? Well, okay, yeah, you can have averages in terms of height, weight, like all that. But what there's no averages isn't like your soft skills, your personality, who you are and how you establish that. And I realized like, okay, you can kind of understand like the average of IQ, the average of this, the average of whatever that kind of like measurement is. But what you can't measure is like personality and story. And what's so important, especially like what we said earlier with like the interviews and like the first part is like that, what's your story? You can't measure the impact of how you communicate with someone and how you treasure that conversation. Because whether it's with a hiring manager, whether it's with a friend, one thing that takes away from my imposter syndrome is that being able to simply communicate with someone, you get this story that is not comparable with anyone else's. And at the end of the day, whether it's an interview, whether it's a resume submission, going into it to not just learn, but to understand someone and to understand that your story should be heard, not can be, should be heard and should be accepted by other people, because like you're a human at the end of the day. It feels like we're all in small bubbles. And when you apply to something, it's like, okay, this is just like that's it. Like, that's all I can do. But no, there's so many opportunities. And if you get like rejected by something, which you and I have probably gotten rejected in like a lot of things. Like it's just up from there because there's so many opportunities to take on.
When you're talking about story, I got a really good thought. Like, I think people focus so much about whether they're at a certain point or not. Like, oh, I'm not a great public speaker, as if there's a 0 and 100, like what you just said, 0 to 100. But really, like, it's about the process. There is no limit to anything, really. So don't just like be so focused on that one end goal. Like, it's good to have goals to strive towards, but do not discredit like the whole journey that you've taken. In fact, I would argue that your journey, the story, is more important. It shows your resilience. It shows just what you've been through and what you've done to make yourself better.
It's like if Mark Zuckerberg was like, okay, we got 10 people on this app. Life's good. Like, I've reached my end. But it's like, no, like, there's still so much to go. There's still so many people to see and meet. And I think it's just like having obviously like a realistic mindset, but also like a positive mindset that there's still more to discover. Like, just because either like you got that internship and you're like, okay, great, like it's all good, like I'm done, like I'm just gonna breeze through, everything's great. Or even when I was in first year, I was like, okay, I'm in this great club, like I got people I know, like I'm done. No, like you have to push yourself. And another thing too with like first and second year is just no one is going to tell you what to do anymore. You're going to have to, I think that was another thing with my imposter syndrome, is knowing that like I don't have my mom, my dad, my elementary school teachers to tell me what to do. And it's that self-motivation that I progressively had to learn. I was like not motivated especially like in my second year, because I felt that my high school teachers always told me like what to do or where to go. And the only way you can motivate yourself is when you have like your hobbies on the side, your passion. So don't ever feel that like you just have to apply for jobs. You just have to land internships. You just have to do school. If you wrap your head around like taking care of yourself and motivating yourself through that, then at the end of the day, like you're just going to go in full hand to whatever you can.
Right. And I think following up of what you just said, like if you're just focused on, getting that job, getting that internship, you're never going to be satisfied, because once you're there, you're going to try and reach for something else rather than like embracing the moment and being appreciative of what you already have and taking a look at what you've already accomplished. So yeah, I think overcoming imposter syndrome has a lot to do with just your perspective and shifting that.
Mm-hmm. But it comes with a lot of time. Like, let me tell you, like us talking is like, okay, 1 minute, boom, bam. But it's like search engine optimization. It's like, it takes, it's a long-term approach. It can be 2 years, it can be 3 years, 4 years. But again, it's just starting, right? Like just saying like, once you say, I'm gonna do this and you don't stop, which I always like to do. I'm like, I'm gonna work out every single day. And then it's like, but if you just have that like long-term approach, that as long as I keep progressing and keep believing in myself constantly, obviously there's gonna be lows. Mm-hmm. It's gonna be all good in the end.
Thank you, Kat. I think that was a perfect way to conclude the second episode.
Give me a cheers.
Like you wanna be loved, and this feels like falling in love, falling in love, falling in love.